Good afternoon. On behalf of the British Wizard Broadcasting Service, we regret to inform you that your scheduled podcast, Snidely, Porpington and the House of Borke, has been cancelled by order of Her Majesty Queen Camilla Parker Bowles, Windsor. A suitable replacement program will be supplied to promote public morality, respect for the monarchy, and fidelity in marriage. Thank you. One caveat does exist. As a magical broadcasting service, an archaic loophole allows that listeners may potentially restore the aforesaid program to service if they sincerely, quote, believe in fairies and clap their hands. If the service deems this belief to be sufficient, the program may proceed. Are you ready, listeners?
Snidely, Porpington and the House of Borke, a wizard novel, by J.D. Green and C.B. Wrigley. Prologue 1, a courtesy meeting. Lights dimmed in the passenger car as the train pulled into the station.
"This is King's Cross,"
said the mungle woman's voice over the speaker.
"Change for London Underground and National Rail services."
The year was 1990. Aldous Dumpledorne stretched his legs and rubbed the sleep from his eyes. He enjoyed taking mungle trains down to London once in a while. They involved none of the strain of magical methods. He checked his watch to confirm the time. 2 hours until the meeting. Plenty of space for a refreshing walk in one of the city parks. The only question was, which would it be? To solve this dilemma, the Bogwart headmaster stepped off the train and found the nearest bench on the platform. Once seated, he startled the mungle family with 2 children next to him by pulling up his long blue robes to expose his left knee, which was hideously scarred. "Now then," the silver-haired wizard murmured, tracing his bony finger over the scar. "Victoria Line down to Bakerloo and... Regents Park, splendid." For reasons known perhaps only to himself, the scar on his knee happened to correspond exactly to a map of the underground train lines. Beside him, the mungle children's mouths were agape. Not only did this old gentleman's voluminous silver hair reach well past his shoulders, with a bushel of beard to match, his star-decorated robes looked like something out of Ralph Bakshi's animated Lord of the Rings film.
"Are you Gandalf?"
said the older boy, working from this knowledge. "No, but he is rather a good friend of mine." He gave them a sly wink. The 2 children's eyes grew wider with wonder, but their parents, upon turning around, gave Dumpledorne a horrified look and whisked the tots away toward the exit, muttering in strident whispers that they must never talk to homeless people. The aged headmaster didn't hold the mother and father's reaction against them. His presence among mungle Londoners often forced them to account for his existence somehow, as best they could. On the whole they ignored him, to avoid, he suspected, encouraging such eccentric dress as his was in public. Once he was in the underground network, however, it was much harder for them to simply pretend he wasn't there. Sometimes his robes or beard would get tangled in the ticket turnstiles, or a stray magical pulse from his concealed wand would send the machines into meltdown. The southbound Victoria Line train was densely packed. It was all Dumpledorne could do to squeeze in among the tired, hot, irritated commuters. Unfortunately for him, he'd arrived in town at the height of peak hour traffic, and as the doors clunked shut in the compartment, the grim travelers' faces suggested it was going to be a stifling, humid ride to the next stop. Halfway between stations, the train slowed and came to a gentle halt. A voice crackled over the speaker to say the line was experiencing delays due to a signal failure. From his considerable height, the Bogwart headmaster could see nearly every close-by passenger's face fill with suppressed fury or annoyance. His own robes had the magical ability to stay climate-controlled, but Dumpledorne nevertheless felt pity for his fellow commuters. Reaching inconspicuously down with one hand, he found his wand in the inside robe pocket. Taking hold of the wand, he said in a couple of simple moisture and temperature incantations in his head. In a matter of seconds, the car silently filled with fresh, cool air, greatly soothing the whole packed-in section without anyone quite noticing what had happened. Dumpledorne cracked a surreptitious smile. The chief warlock of the Wizenmoot demanded no thanks for his kind gesture, and merely changed for the Bakerloo at Oxford Circus. Crowds were thick on this platform, too, but eventually he filed with the rest onto a couple of escalators, glancing with them at various adverts and West End theatre posters decorating the walls. He reached the top and started toward the northbound train to Regents Park.
Oi, oi!
A young man's voice cried behind him.
Give us some magic, Merlin!
Dumpledorne decided to do some ignoring of his own and kept walking. Then a burly hand on his shoulder turned him brusquely around.
I was talking to you, mate.
A cloud of cheap brand vodka breath hit the poor headmaster full in the face. The voice belonged to a squat, stubbly young man with a shaved head and bloodshot eyes. He was carrying a crumpled paper bag and had 3 friends behind him in a similar condition.
Go on, Grandad,
said the young man again, slurring his words a bit.
Me and the boys slab a bit of hocus pocus, don't we, lads?
The others behind him belched and gurgled in agreement. All 4 ruffians seemed to be trying the age-old hangover cure of simply continuing to drink alcohol. Dumpledorne was unruffled. I am not Merlin, the headmaster said matter-of-factly, though I am Order of Merlin, by the by. Dumpledorne didn't know why he was saying this. He was just going to give these fellows a confundus charm and be on his way. Perhaps it was momentary egotism.
Why, ho, look at the beard on him!
The swaying ringleader had lost all sense of boundaries and was now fiddling with the end of Dumpledorne's whiskers, while behind him his friends broke into raucous giggles. The Supreme Mugwump's mind was running a little faster now, trying to figure out the best strategy to exit the situation with the fewest Mungles alerted. Grasping his wand unseen, he began casting a powerful memory charm on the 4 ne'er-do-wells, and the lead hooligan vomited a gigantic pile of sick right at Dumpledorne's feet. The wizard's concentration was snapped and the spell ruined as he stepped back in alarm. More worrying than this, a large throng of Mungles had started to gather around the whole spectacle, including a couple of inquisitive transport for London police near the back. Dumpledorne knew it was only going to get trickier the more people showed up. He took a deep breath and closed his eyes, summoning a knockout memory spell that would wipe the minds of every Mungle in a 20-foot radius. When he opened his eyes, about 50 of the poor sods were staring at him blankly, mouths hanging open a bit. It had worked, but what to tell them all now? Listen, everyone, Dumpledorne waffled, trying to think of a suitable distraction for so many people. In the corner of his eye, he noticed a young woman come through the ticket gate. She had her hair buzzed very short. Sinead O'Connor is over there. She's signing autographs. It wasn't much, but it sufficed. The 50-odd Mungles swarmed the girl like zombies, while Dumpledorne walked swiftly away.
Not even Irish?
He heard the poor girl yell at the disoriented mob's questions. Exiting the underground at last into the warm April sunshine, the Bogwart headmaster stopped at the first corner stall he found and bought a packet of sherbet lemons. Regents Park shone splendidly in the morning sun. Its wide paths and green swards beckoned to all passers, and before long Dumpledorne found a welcoming bench in the shade. He popped open the sherbet lemons and gazed at a group of young people playing hacky-sack on the grass. This was a simple Mungle game he'd only recently discovered. The players stood in a circle, kicking a little cloth ball filled with dried rice in order to keep it airborne. These players seemed to be unusually dexterous with their feet. Dumpledorne was mildly intrigued by the youths for another reason, their altogether singular fashion sense. They wore studded leather jackets, torn jeans, and graphic T-shirts displaying rude words. But the piece de resistance was their hairstyles, spiked, dyed, and gelled into fantastical points and mohawks. The tints ranged from hot pink to purple to blood red. From his studies of non-magical culture, the veteran professor was fairly sure this subsection of Mungles called themselves punks. As he stared, one of the punks noticed him and pointed. To his surprise, instead of becoming aggressive like the sozzled geezer at Oxford Circus, the punk and his companion started grinning and nodding at him in approval. Perhaps they appreciated his own outfit. In any case, they cheerily waved and beckoned him over, so what could the aged headmaster do but join them? Sharing the sherbet lemons out among the group, the supercentenarian wizard became a remarkably quick study at hacky-sack. Unbeknownst to his partners, he did have a slight edge on physics with basic floating charms. This let the ball hang in the air just half a second longer than it should have, helping the long-bearded professor get a knobbly scarred knee underneath it. As all good things must come to an end, so eventually did this. Checking his watch, Dumpledorne saw it was just about time to be heading to number 10 Downing Street. There he was to meet Copernicus Fadge, the new Minister of Magic, and introduce him to the Mungle Prime Minister. The punks evinced no surprise whatsoever when their bearded and berobed friend told them he had to leave for a meeting with the PM.
Meeting Maggie, are you?
said the punk with fierce devil-horn spikes.
Give her this from me, Gov,
he said, raising 2 fingers in a mungle gesture the headmaster suspected was not at all polite.
My dad's a miner.
The policeman outside number 10 had been forewarned of 2 strange men in robes coming to visit the PM. So he merely gave them a curt nod as they passed, and the door opened from inside. The butler led Dumpledorne and Fadge through the checker-floored entrance room and up the winding stairs, whose walls were decked with portraits of past mungle heads of government.
Not a very lively bunch, are they?
Fadge muttered to Dumpledorne with a nervous chuckle. Recognizing this as a half-hearted joke, the headmaster gave a smile and shook his head.
If you'll kindly wait here,
said the butler.
The Prime Minister will see you shortly.
He left them seated in a couple of armchairs in a waiting room. A silence stretched between the 2 wizards, long enough to become awkward.
School year passing all right, is it?
said Fadge. Swimmingly, said Dumpledorne. The minister had perhaps been looking for a more expansive answer and bit his lip. A short and fidgety man by nature, Fadge easily gave away that he was feeling apprehensive. He was only a few months into his position, having been chosen by default after a more popular candidate had turned down the job. That more popular candidate was, of course, Dumpledorne himself.
What's she like? This mungle minister, I mean.
Dumpledorne considered the question for a moment. He'd known Margaret Thatcher distantly for years, from occasionally assisting the previous Minister of Magic, Millicent Bagnold. While Millicent got on famously with Mrs. Thatcher, Dumpledorne had chosen to keep himself distant. Something about that no-such-thing-as-society business put him off. I cannot tell you much for certain, but in the Mungle press she's known as the Iron Lady.
Ah,
said Fadge, not seeming to like this answer. The silence resumed.
Good morning,
said a secretary walking into the room.
The Prime Minister will see you now.
Dumpledorne got up briskly, followed by Fadge at a more timid pace. They entered an impressively large office lined with antique portraits and a few Turner landscapes. The wallpaper had beige and tan stripes, while most of the furniture was dark, solid oak and mahogany. Behind a large, old-fashioned desk sat the Prime Minister, signing a last few documents and looking decidedly busy and important. Having made this non-verbal point, she stood up and came forward to greet the 2 wizards. Dumpledorne introduced Fadge. She shook both their hands. Then her secretary retired, and they were alone in the room. So, you're the new, Minister for Mungles, is it? Mrs. Thatcher said in her home county's drawl. It's Minister for Magic, madam, said Dumpledorne patiently. If you'll recall, Mungles is in fact the wizarding word for non-magical people. Oh, is it? Well, do sit for a moment. She turned and walked back to her desk. Dumpledorne and Fadge took the 2 straight-backed chairs, upholstered in vertical black and gold stripes, in front of it. I do recall, from speaking with your predecessor, that these meetings are a sort of courtesy in the main.
That's correct, madam,
said Fadge, timorously speaking for himself at last. He had been uncomfortable around his forerunner, Maleficent Bagnold, as he was around most assertive women. This Mungle politician was no exception.
They are a courtesy between governments, except in circumstances of unusual importance or danger to both communities.
Well, which is it, pray? Said the Prime Minister in an almost bantering tone. It's not that evil chap again, Earl Maldenwart? Lord Vulton Maud, madam, said Dumpledorne with a stifled sigh. Yes, that's right. Well, we dealt with those Dagos in the Falklands a few years back. I'm sure you read about it. I dare say we're prepared for any, criminal magicians.
In any case, no, Prime Minister. You must be named as long gone, presumed dead, and quite unlikely to ever trouble our world again.
Ah, splendid.
The Ministry of Magic is still on constant alert, however, as not all of the Dark Lord's followers have been accounted for, so we continue to maintain a secure line of communication with your domestic intelligence branch, as my predecessor no doubt told you.
Indeed. The Prime Minister began to tap a finger on one of her fountain pens. You've got the Dark Wizards, and I've got the Mick Provos. Plus ça change. Well,
Aldous and I don't wish to take any more of your time than necessary.
Fudge cut in, sensing they were about to be shooed out the door. It's quite all right, said Thatcher, her tone indicating the opposite.
But before we go, I'm just wanted to express my deep admiration for your decade in government.
Dumpledorne almost rolled his eyes. Fadge could be the most frightful toady.
And in the interest of good government, I hope you call on me if you ever have need.
Thatcher said nothing, merely raising her eyebrows with the thinnest of smiles. But Fadge wasn't finished.
I keep up with the mungle, non-magical press, and I couldn't help but notice last week you had a rather bad spate of rioting over a poll tax, if I'm not mistaken, even here in Trafalgar Square.
The Prime Minister's thin smile disappeared. Dumpledorne knew this was the moment to shut up, but of course his companion did not.
I just hope that you know that if you ever require more specialised sort of help, please don't hesitate to...
That's much appreciated, I'm sure. If I ever have such need, I will certainly speak to that, portrait about it. She nodded her iron hairdo at an inconspicuous painting in the corner which happened to depict Ulrich Gramps, the first Minister of Magic. As the door closed behind them, Fadge's expression turned to one of satisfaction and relief.
I think that went rather well, Aldous?
Dumpledorne was about to agree when they heard a piercingly loud cackle behind the door. Fadge scowled, and they descended back to Downing Street. "Sherbet lemon?" Dumpledorne offered his colleague by way of a small consolation.
No, thank you.
Fadge snapped. Then with a loud crack, he teleported back to his office.
Thanks so much for listening, and we hope you enjoyed this week's episode. If you'd like to support the show, nothing helps more than telling your friends in person and spreading the word on social media. You can find our pages on Twitter, Instagram, and YouTube. We'll soon be releasing our first behind-the-scenes episode, where authors John, that's me, and Corin discuss the inspirations for each chapter and explain some of the more obscure nonsense we've sprinkled into them. For more info on the show, go to our website at borkepodcast.wordpress.com. That's Borke spelled B-O-R-K-E. Here you'll also find artwork by the authors and friends, as well as PDF copies of every episode for our listeners in the Islamic Republic of Iran and elsewhere overseas. Thanks again, and see you next week.